One of the most anticipated and important sessions of the year has just ended, qualifying in Monaco, and it was also one of the most exciting. With red flags, crashes, drivers brushing the walls, and surprises. We're going to analyze what this qualifying session left us with, and what to expect for Sunday. Before we start, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Let's start with the worst team in this qualifying session, a team that had both of its drivers eliminated in Q1, and that's Alpine. I expected more from this team for this qualifying session, and for this weekend in Monaco, mainly because their power unit deficit wasn't supposed to affect them as much here as it does at other tracks. And yet, both drivers ended up eliminated. Pierre Gasly finished 18th, and Franco Colapinto, the Argentine driver, finished 20th. Gasly was just over a tenth away from making it from Q1 to Q2, finishing in 18th place, while Franco Colapinto was much further behind. The Argentine driver was 6 tenths behind his teammate, more than half a second. Honestly, they went with a different strategy in Q1. Both Alpine drivers were the first to complete their final Q1 attempt, which isn't ideal given the track improvement, but both of them had already tried, in the first part of Q1, to go out on medium tires. They were the only ones out of all 10 teams to try medium tires in Q1. They put on new soft tires with 5 minutes left, and like I said, they were among the first to start their final Q1 attempt. Gasly was affected by Stroll in his first Q1 attempt, but then, well, he improved with the soft tire. We'll talk about Stroll in a bit, but honestly, it's a disappointment for the French team, who will be starting 17th and 18th anyway since Bergman has a 10-place grid penalty, and Stroll has a 1-place penalty. It's very likely that Stroll will get more grid penalties, which we'll talk about soon. But regarding the Argentine, regarding Franco, he said that he felt more confident on the medium tires than on the softs, and it showed. He was closer to Gasly in the first part of Q1, and at times, on the mediums, he even finished ahead. Of course, Gasly was affected by Stroll. And then, when it came time to put on the soft tires, that's when the French driver pulled out a big gap. We were saying that Franco had a lot to lose in this qualifying session, and very little to gain, especially considering Alpine's performance. And seeing where his teammate ended up, and that there were other rookies who had accidents over the weekend, some not so rookie anymore. It was a weekend where there really wasn't much to be done. We'll see what the French team can do with their strategy. I wouldn't be surprised to see both Alpine drivers pitting on the first or second lap to quickly get that mandatory stop out of the way and try to push with clean air. Franco said they had good pace, talking about race pace, but in order to really take advantage of that race pace, you'll have to get out of traffic, and that's probably what the French team will try to do in the opening laps. Speaking of a team that also had a disaster today and had both of its drivers knocked out in Q2, that's the Mercedes team. We have Antonelli, who ended up 15th and couldn't even take part in Q2 because Kimi crashed at the chicane on his last Q2 attempt while he was running 15th, fighting to get in. He hit the inside, kind of like Hatcher did on Friday, but he hit it with both tires, broke both tires, and went into the barriers at the chicane. He was fighting hard, pushing to the limit. The Mercedes team is really struggling with getting the tires into the optimal operating window. They couldn't manage it all weekend, and honestly, I expected a bit more from this team at the Monaco Grand Prix. It was really tough, to be honest. Meanwhile, Russell also had a difficult qualifying session. Russell reported smoke coming from the front brakes during Q1, and in Q2, he went out for his first run on the medium tire, but reported a loss of power going out to Massenet. After that, the car shut off and he was left stranded in the tunnel during his first attempt, bringing out the red flag. He tried to reset the car, but they couldn't do it, and that's why both Mercedes will start 14th and 15th. A very tough weekend, unable to get the most out of the tires. Russell struggled there in Q1, but he hadn't suffered that much before. He had managed to get into the top 5, which leaves us wondering what would have happened if he hadn't. So, we'll see what they can do, what the Mercedes team is capable of. I think Russell could have fought a bit more or at least finished in 6th or 5th place in qualifying, but that electrical problem left him with no chance in Q2, and now Mercedes will be starting from their worst grid positions of the entire year. We'll have to see what they can do. One thing in their favor is that this year, with 2 mandatory pit stops, there could be a bit more chaos, which might help them move up, but they're in a very, very tough spot and will have to do something different from everyone else. I wouldn't be surprised to see them start on the hard tire and try to go long, or start on softs and pit very early. Something similar to what we talked about with the Alpine team. G team. We have Bortolito in 16th place, and Hülkenberg, the German driver, finished 13th, taking advantage of the fact that both Mercedes cars didn't make it to Q2. So there were already 2 spots gained there. Hülkenberg finished ahead of Bortolito. We were talking about it earlier on Friday, that Hülkenberg's experience could make a small difference, but it's really nothing because in Q1 he was only 31 thousandths ahead. Hülkenberg made it through in 14th. Bortolito was 16th, and he was just 22 thousandths short of Antonelli's cutoff to get into Q2. So I think it's a good job by the Brazilian driver, getting very close to his teammate on a track that's really tough, with a car as difficult as the G-Teens. Look, they're actually in a good position because with Hülkenberg starting 13th, if there's a bit of chaos or something happens, and if they nail the strategy, I wouldn't be surprised if they could end up fighting for some points. They have fast cars behind them, like the Mercedes, as we mentioned, but it's really hard to overtake here, so we'll see what the G team can do, with both of their cars starting pretty close together. On the track, as we can see, it's just the 2 Mercedes separating them, so I think Hulk did a good job taking advantage of the opportunity. Then in Q2, he wasn't close to advancing because he was more than 3/10 off Esteban Ocon's cutoff time, but I think they were hoping, with some luck, to get 1 car into Q2, and they ended up in 13th place, so I think that's a positive. Speaking of the Williams team, I was expecting a little more from them. We have Carlos Sainz in 11th, Alexander Albon in 10th place. Both drivers went out in Q2 on the medium tire. They put on new mediums in Q2 for their first attempt, and I think it ended up costing them, especially Sainz, since they put on the soft tire for their last attempt, for a single attempt, right? With a new one. And Sainz reported that he had no grip with that tire and was knocked out in Q2, ending up, let's see, 7/10 behind his teammate, more than 7/10. Albon made it through Q2 easily, finishing 3rd, while Sainz was 11th, and there, the Spanish driver was clearly affected. That's why he said that he had no grip. He probably wasn't able to get the tire into the right operating window, unlike his teammate. But then with Albon, something similar happened, I think, in Q3, since Albon finished 10th, about a second or 2 off the lead, ending up behind Lawson, Ocon, Alonso, and Hülkenberg. And I was expecting him, fighting with Hülkenberg in that 6th position for Williams. He also did his first Q3 attempt on medium tires, and his last attempt wasn't good. So, I think the Williams team had the chance to go a bit higher, especially with Alexander Albon, who had a really good Q1 and Q2, and was ahead of Sainz throughout the whole qualifying. But in that last attempt, they couldn't get the most out of the car, and Alexander Albon ended up in 10th place. We'll see what the Williams team can do with both of their cars starting off with pretty similar strategies. Haas team. We have Ollie Behrman, who finished in 17th place, but he'll be starting last because he has a 10th-place grid penalty due to what happened in free practice 2, where he overtook Carlos Sainz under a red flag, and that earned him a 10th-place penalty. He'll probably pit on the first lap of the race, doing something similar to what we talked about with the Alpine team, right? And try to go all the way to the end with clean air, or maybe get both pit stops out of the way quickly. Something like that could happen since they're pretty far back. But Ollie's qualifying was already affected by what happened on Friday. He was, about a 10th and a half behind his teammate, Esteban Ocon, who made it to 13th in Q1, 10th in Q2, knocking Sainz out by a 10th. I think, that problem Sainz had actually worked in his favor today, and Ocon was celebrating. Very good, very happy. It's a track that, as we mentioned, could suit the Haas team well, considering what happened in Bahrain with, that lack of speed or high-speed corners, which is where they'd had trouble this year. So really good for Ocon, since this is a circuit that always works out for him. He feels comfortable here, and he's done a great job. In Q3, he started with new medium tires, and his last attempt, he did it with, softs and managed to get ahead of Albon and also ahead of Liam Lawson, ending up 18 thousandths behind Fernando Alonso, and 20 thousandths behind Hülkenberg. I mean, Ocon was just 21 thousandths, no, sorry, 19 thousandths behind Hulkenberg and from taking 6th place. Phenomenal job by the French driver. We'll see how aggressive he is at the start, like he was last year. Let's remember, that he attacked his teammate. Well, he has Alonso right there, and I don't think he'll hesitate to go after him, knowing Esteban Ocon. That's why it could be quite, risky for Fernando Alonso. And speaking of Aston Martin, let's remember that Stroll came into this qualifying session with a grid penalty because of what happened with Charles Leclerc in free practice 1 on Friday. But it's most likely that he'll be penalized again, since in Q1, coming out of the tunnel, he blocked Gasly. Gasly almost ran into him. He had to slam on the brakes and swerve to avoid him, and they're investigating him for that. At the moment I'm recording this, it's right after qualifying ended. If there are any penalties, I'll leave them in the comments, because he's not the only one being investigated, so I'll add that in the comments as well. And we'll also talk about it live tonight. So, at 8 p.m. Argentina time, we'll be live, broadcasting and analyzing all the latest information. But getting back to Stroll, phenomenal weekend for Stroll, right? Penalized on Friday, most likely penalized on Saturday too. He's going to start from 19th position, because whether he gets a 3-place grid penalty or not, he's going to start. Well, he loses that spot to, specifically, Pinto. But Ollie Behrman has a 10-place penalty, so he'll drop behind him. So, Stroll and Behrman are going to start 19th and 20th, so it's not really going to affect him much. Alonso finished in 7th position. Very good job by the Asturian driver, who in Q1 was 9/10ths faster than his teammate. Meanwhile, in Q2, he placed 8th with a lap on medium tires. Fernando Alonso did Q2 on mediums. And in Q3, the Asturian driver, used worn soft tires for his first attempt and ended up in 7th position. Oh well, just 1,000th of a second behind Isaac Hatcher. It's incredible, Fernando Alonso was just 1,000th away from being 6th. That's how close the gaps are in Monaco, just like we were talking about earlier with Esteban Ocon. But a good job by Aston Martin, considering it's a car that usually struggles quite a bit in slow corners. The upgrades from Imola were a step forward. Here as well, I think obviously Alonso managed to get a little extra out of it, but this could get even better because Hamilton is under investigation, and if Hamilton gets a penalty, Hatcher, Verstappen, and Alonso could all move up a position. We'll also be discussing that in the comments. So, good job from Aston Martin, we'll see how it goes. I think Alonso is facing a better opportunity than what we saw before. In Imola, he started 5th, while in Monaco it's impossible to overtake. In Imola, you can maybe overtake a little bit. The strategy didn't work out for him. We'll see what happens here. If Aston Martin with Alonso still can't score points here, honestly, it's going to be something that, will be a case study. We'll see what they can do and, as I said, let's keep an eye on it. I think the one who could keep him from that is Ocon, who I believe is going to be pretty aggressive with the Spanish driver. Speaking of the Vicker team. Phenomenal job by the Vicker team. They were the best of the rest. They finished as the 4th best car. Hatcher in 6th, Lawson in 9th position. Liam Lawson, who made it to Q3 for the first time this season. Liam Lawson really needed this, a breather after everything he's been through. Very good job, even though he was once again outperformed by his teammate. The difference was just a 10th, basically. He finished 9th. Isaac Hadjar in 6th, but it's the first time both teammates have made it to Q3 together. We'll see what they can do. Both Racing Bulls used soft tires on their first attempt. But speaking of Hadjar, what Hadjar did was even better than what Dawson did. Why? Because Hadjar, on his first Q3 attempt, wasn't able to set a time. He ended up without a time on his first Q3 run. He aborted the lap because it was a bad one, and on his second attempt, he went out and took 6th place, just ahead of Alonso by 1,000th of a second. So, phenomenal work from the French driver after having a Friday and a second free practice where he crashed twice, brushed the wall, and had also brushed it in the first free practice. He was on the edge, but regained his confidence and managed to put together a very good lap. The French driver, who, as we said, even though this is his best starting position in Formula 1, this 6th place could get even better depending on what happens with Lewis Hamilton. The Ricard team is having a very good opportunity. Red Bull team. Yuki Tsunoda finished in 12th place. He was out in Q1, but on his last attempt in Q1, he made it into Q2 with a good lap, moving up to 10th place, but he was pretty frustrated in Q2. He finished Q2 on used soft tires, which already had 3 or 4 laps on them, so it wasn't ideal, and he complained quite a bit. He told the team, "I knew this was going to happen," so Yuki wasn't happy at all. I think there was a chance for him to make it into Q3. He was just a tenth and a half behind Esteban Ocon, but like I said, that was on his last attempt with used soft tires for the Japanese driver. Speaking of Max Verstappen finished in 5th place. He didn't have a good lap on his last attempt in Q3. He went wide in sector 2, made a mistake, and lost a lot of time in that sector. He lost, compared to, for example, Norris, 3.5 tenths. He lost 3 tenths to Piastri, and more than 4 tenths to Leclerc in that sector 2, because it had actually been a good attempt, or a good first sector for Max Verstappen. And that difference, well, was the difference between finishing 4th or 5th. I don't think there was much more to it, because as we can see, the gap between Hamilton and Piastri is quite significant. I think that, depending on what happens with Hamilton, it's not really going to affect him in the end, because I don't know if Max had enough to get into the top 3, and if Lewis gets penalized, he'll end up in that 4th position. And actually, the reason Hamilton is being investigated is for blocking Verstappen, which I'll talk about when I discuss Hamilton. We'll see what Max Verstappen can do. As always, we only have the 2 Ferraris and the 2 McLarens up there. The Red Bull always ends up alone because of the huge gap between one garage and the other, and that ends up hurting him. But we know that when it comes to strategy, the Red Bull team is a step ahead of the rest, and I think what they have going for them this weekend is that there are 2 mandatory pit stops, and they have little to lose since they're already starting behind the 2 McLarens, and a lot to gain. So we'll see how risky the Red Bull team is with their strategy this Sunday, and we'll be watching to see what happens with Lewis Hamilton, which actually brings me to talk about the Ferrari team, since Hamilton, had an accident at the end of the 3rd free practice. It wasn't the best Saturday for Lewis today, which probably affected his confidence a little bit. Ferrari had to change the front wing, the right front suspension, both rear suspensions, and the gearbox. He crashed on the way up Massenet, right there, just before the casino corner. He broke the car, but they managed to fix it in time. Still, whether you like it or not, it can affect your confidence a little. It happened on the last lap of free practice 3. In Q1, Hamilton got in Verstappen's way at that same corner where he had crashed in free practice 3. Hamilton was going slowly on the inside, right on the racing line. They warned him, but the warning from the pit wall came too late. Verstappen was coming right up, had to brake and abort his attempt, so they're investigating him for this, and like I said, most likely he'll get a 3-place grid penalty, because here in Monaco they're pretty strict about that. If that happens, he would start behind Fernando Alonso in 7th position. Verstappen, Hadjar, and Fernando would each move up 1 spot. It would be a shame, both for Lewis, but well, the mistake was made, and above all, it would mostly hurt the Ferrari team, since they have both cars in 2nd and 3rd. 2nd and 4th, to battle with McLaren, and strategically, that could work out really well for them. If Hamilton gets penalized, he's already at a disadvantage, and Leclerc will be left alone against the 2 McLarens. Speaking of Q3, Hamilton did his first run on used soft tires compared to his teammate, and then on his last attempt, he ended up quite far behind. He was even 3 tenths behind Charles Leclerc, who was on fire all weekend. Leclerc, in his first Q3 attempt, complained that he had a bit of traffic, and it affected not just his lap, but also his confidence in how much to push on his 2nd attempt. When we got to the final Q3 run, both McLarens were 1st and 2nd. Then it was Leclerc and Hamilton. And in his last attempt, he took provisional pole with a really good lap, staying ahead of Piastri, but then Lando Norris snatched pole from him at the end. So, I think he's left with a bitter taste. I was quite disappointed when I was interviewing Leclerc, but considering Ferrari's standings this year, finishing 2nd and 4th is a very positive thing. They were just a 10th off pole, and we'll see what they can do. Let's see what the Ferrari team can do. If Hamilton doesn't get a penalty, I think they have a good chance, because they're in a position where they could sacrifice one driver, right? Thinking about strategy, which I don't think McLaren is in a position to do. We'll see how Ferrari plays it, especially considering there will be 2 pit stops. Also, since McLaren sometimes tends to make pretty complicated and hard to understand strategy calls, Ferrari might have a chance or two, especially since their race pace is also really strong, right? Maybe, getting 1 or 2 laps in clean air. If you have the chance to create a gap with an undercut or an overcut, it could really benefit Charles Leclerc, who is in a great position to attack. Speaking of the McLaren team, both Norris and Piastri seemed more comfortable throughout the whole weekend. Piastri hit the wall in Q1. He finished third, just 175 thousandths behind his teammate. At the time, he asked them to check the car. He also scraped the wall at Rasgas while finishing his last lap in Q2, struggling much more with the rear end than his teammate. And in Q3, both drivers went out very early to make their final attempt. At that moment, they were running 1-2, separated by 67 thousandths. They went out to do 2 attempts, while everyone else only did 1 attempt with new tires at the end. After the first attempt, the 2 of them were separated by just 15 thousandths, with Norris ahead again, just like in the first run of Q3. They did a cool-down lap to prepare for their final attempt, and that's when, in Q3, Leclerc overtook both McLaren drivers. Piastri made a mistake in a chicane coming out of the tunnel on his final attempt. He went wide in that section or lost a bit of time compared to Lando Norris, because Piastri had set the fastest time in the first sector, but then lost time there and ended up losing a bit more in the final sector, finishing in 3rd place. Meanwhile, Lando Norris put in a phenomenal lap. The British driver set the fastest time in the 3rd sector, which gave him that pole position, because that's where Charles Leclerc ended up making the difference, since Leclerc had been very close in the 1st sector, with Norris even a little bit better. Leclerc had beaten Norris in the 2nd sector, but on the final attempt, that last run through the 3rd sector gave him more than 1/10 of a second advantage. So, a really great job by a phenomenal Lando Norris, who secures his first pole position in Australia. That's exactly what he needed, to qualify ahead of his teammate Oscar Piastri. With the pace of that McLaren, he has the chance right from the start to push in clean air and try to pull away and open up a gap. Or not, but they're going to be playing this strategy game with his teammate. I don't think McLaren will sacrifice either of their 2 drivers. Both of them are very close in the championship, and that's where things could get tricky for them, in my opinion, especially considering what we discussed about Ferrari. But Lando Norris is facing his first real chance to win the Monaco Grand Prix or take victory at the Monaco Grand Prix. Although we know it's more complicated than in previous years, because with 2 mandatory pit stops, luck strategy, a possible virtual safety car, a red flag, or something else working against you comes into play a bit more. So I think all the teams and all the drivers are going to be racking their brains tonight over strategy, making sure they have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, a ton of variables for whatever might happen, depending on how the Grand Prix unfolds. And he is the only driver who has gone under 110, setting the Monaco track record with a 1:09.954. So, a really great job by Lando Norris, who, when it came to handling the pressure, at what I think is the most high-pressure moment of the year, Monaco qualifying, responded phenomenally, but he still has to finish the job on Sunday. I'll wrap up this summary here. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next Motorsport Planet video. Goodbye.